Well, good morning and welcome to another week of Journey with Christ. My name is Mark Mitchell. I'm the preaching minister at the Park Avenue Church of Christ, and I'm joined as always by Steve Fox, a minister for over 50 years in the Kanawha Valley area. How you doing today, buddy?
Hey Mark, how are you?
I'm doing fine. It's not snowing outside.
If I was any better, it'd have to be twins. No, you're right.
Don't scare us like that.
Man. Would my mother and father have been so happy? Oh, good grief.
Double the trouble.
Maybe that's what happened. I was born and she wouldn't let the other one out. I don't know. No, you're right about the weather. I mean, with this episode that we've been having with the virus, and you just think you're seeing maybe the end, and then get the storms, and people in Texas and Arkansas don't know how to handle that stuff.
No, I was talking to someone, and their comment to me was, I don't understand why people put water lines and ceilings and things of that nature. And I mean, having lived in a coastal area,
Yeah.
periodically they don't think that it's ever going to happen. New construction doesn't happen, but anything that's built 20, 30 years ago, there's the probability that it was built not with the idea that they were actually going to have snowstorms or freeze. Well, and Texas had something they had never experienced, like 5 or 6 days of it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have it dip down to Texas and just go down and come right back up.
And that's probably global warming, right?
Yeah, well, evidently now it's global freezing.
When I went to college in Arkansas. Loved the years I was down there. I used to hear bad things about Arkansas, or just it reminds me of West Virginia, really. The number of people who are there,
We appreciate that.
The way the state is. They don't have a professional sport.
Mm-mm.
They don't have any professional sports. But I was driving from, it snowed, the second year I was down there, it snowed maybe an inch. And people had not seen that for a while. And Susie and I drove from our apartment up to the main campus. We counted 8 cars in the ditch between our apartment and they just didn't know how to drive in it.
No.
They weren't used to that.
Yeah, there's this thought process that says, okay, if you start to slide, hit the gas.
Well, I was taught in driver's ed you're always supposed to turn
into
which seems exactly the
opposite of what you should do. Yeah. I know.
Well, we got the weather thing solved. What else we got to solve? If we talk long enough about this,
We don't have to talk
we
about
don't have to get to Revelation
20. I know. And it's not that my indifference, and I don't mean that I have anything indifferent about the Bible. I love reading the Bible. I love reading what these men of God have put on in these books. But this particular chapter, as I'm sure you're going to point out, has been the most divisive, most misunderstood, and the most dangerous, maybe, chapter in the Bible.
Without a doubt.
And I never really felt like I needed to be invested in an opinion that could end up destroying relationships with people.
Sure.
I've had people actually ask me, what do you think about Revelation 20? I said, I don't give it a whole lot of thought. Now, at first, they're kind of offended, maybe. But I look at them and say, listen, I'm not sure about that chapter. And I am not convinced anybody can be sure about that chapter.
Well, I have a little advantage over you because I read chapter 20 last night in Spanish. So I'm confused.
So last night you stayed at the Holiday Inn. Express.
I'm confused in 2 languages. You're just confused in 1 language.
Okay, I got it. I got that.
How far are we going to read at the beginning?
Well,
Why don't you read?
all right, I'll read the first 6 verses, the 1,000 years. That's going to be one of the highlights of our morning. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain. And he seized the dragon, that ancient serpent who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the pit, and shut it, and sealed it over him, so that he might not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were ended. After that he must be released for a little while. Then I saw thrones, and seated on them were those to whom the authority to judge was committed. And I saw that the souls of those who had been beheaded for the testimony of Jesus and for the word of God, and those who had not worshipped the beast or its image, and had not received its mark on their foreheads or their hands. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. The rest of the dead did not come to life until the 1,000 years were ended. This is the first resurrection. Blessed and holy is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and they will reign with him for 1,000 years. And for those of you who did not notice, I don't have my iPad this morning. I actually had to go find my Bible.
You feel more biblical?
No.
No, okay. I was looking for my iPad this morning. I couldn't find it either.
Yeah.
Let me mention a couple introductory things here. If you want to, what Mark said a little while ago about this passage being very divisive, and that's because it's very, very difficult to understand. It's a puzzle, really, and there are a lot of conflicting theories about it. Some of us have been hopelessly have studied it and tried to make some kind of sense out of it. I think when you read this chapter, your heart and your mind ought to have a little bit of caution and a little bit of modesty, because you can't be arrogant about a passage like this where even brilliant scholars, New Testament scholars, Old Testament scholars, look at the background here. And if you go get commentaries on Revelation, if you started out with commentaries on Revelation and you were thinking, what does this mean? Even the first 6 verses that you read, and by the way, the word 1,000 there's 6 times, so
yes.
It must be pretty important.
Yeah, there's a relevance to it.
It sure is. And if you start thinking about, how do I look at this book? We studied several months ago, that there were basically 3 interpretations of the book of Revelation, and there are basically 3 interpretations of Revelation 20. So if you put those 2 together, you're kind of struggling with, how does this come out in the end?
How do you marry everything up together?
Exactly. There's a group of scholars, and I love to read these guys because it's kind of on the edge, on the verge. They're called preterists, and that word just means past in Greek, because these people believe, because of their study and their own research, and that Revelation was a book that was addressed to the Christians in the first century, and it was not a list of something that's going to happen for the next 5,000 years or 10,000 years.
But this chapter makes that one hard.
This chapter makes it very difficult. Matter of fact, if I were debating somebody who believed this,
you could be on either side of it.
There are verses on both sides. I could win on one side and step across the street and win on the other side.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. But preterists are people who believe that this prophecy has already been fulfilled in the first century. People who believe in the historical interpretation of Revelation believe that from the time of Jesus, there's a history timeline. And they see all kinds of things in Revelation. They see the Antichrist and Adolf Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin and Lenin and Henry Kissinger. They see a whole line of things. Well, that's what this means. And they believe very sincerely that is the historical sequence from the time Jesus was here until the end of time.
And
the end of the world. And by the way, the end of time is not a biblical passage. It's not biblical.
Well, and the other thing is too, the 1,000 years. I've actually heard people say, that could have been like the Dark Ages.
Yes.
That was a period.
That was a part of the
historical context of it. Yeah, there wasn't much going on, But then all of a sudden, the world took on a whole new form. They're attributing that reality to happen with Satan's influence. I mean, and there is a hint of truth to it, but there's not. How do we know what any of this stuff is?
These are the same people that put all this together, and some churches teach as part of their doctrine that in this interpretation of Revelation there are 7 different ages. 7 different ages that came about because there are 7 days of God's creation. So there's going to be 7 different ages. That's the historical group. The third group is, and all these have little subtitles.
Yeah, getting ready to say you're getting ready to get in one that has 2.
Yeah, very different views. Maybe one guy says, I'm a futurist, but his idea of what that futurist interpretation is totally different than somebody else.
Yeah, right.
But the third one is, after preterist and historical, is futuristic, that from this time right now, from where we are, and we're reading this book, in the future, there's nothing in this book that's been fulfilled. No prophecy has been fulfilled. Everything is on the other side of us.
Of whenever this event.
Whenever that event takes place.
Right.
Yeah. So that's why that's why it's so difficult, because there's so many brilliant men and women who have studied Revelation, and specifically studied Revelation 20, where they might have some guesses, but nobody has written a book that said, here are the keys and this is exactly what it means.
Well, the futurist individuals, actually, from my study, I don't think I'm remembering this correctly, began somewhere around the 17th and 18th century, some of these thought patterns. Because up until that point in time, they didn't get into, it seems, we don't find a whole lot of historical stuff with some of this millennial, premillennial, postmillennial thoughts.
Yes.
But somewhere in that period of time, it became very popular, and it actually start becoming popular when we actually hit what our society calls the Enlightenment period, where people began to study deeper context, deeper meanings. There was just this education had come to a new point where we had all kinds of resources, and people actually started spending time researching and finding these things.
Before that, there was a very, very low percentage of people who could read.
That's right.
The literacy percentage was not good at all.
I mean, it's amazing that in the first century, that this period of time, they were more literate than people that were in the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries, because it had died away. It actually kind of through the Dark Ages or whatever.
Yeah.
So now I forget where I was going with that, but
you were talking about the Dark Ages and how it's been difficult for people to even initially read the text.
Well, it is at about this time that people started coming up with ideas. This is all futuristic. And it was a popular thought concept, and of which it took over, and now everybody, and since that period of time, how many times has the things that we've read up through 1 through 19 supposedly happened in history? Because I can remember just in the year, and I know everybody here, in the year 2000, 1999. I mean, this is going to be one of those things, and especially after 9/11 and the Middle East conflict just started. I mean, I can remember here it all became popular again. All of these signs pointing to, hey, this is about to happen.
And those prophecies come and go, and you've got all these men and women who are listed as the ones who are against the Christians. Like, you start with Nero Caesar during the lifetime or after the lifetime of Jesus, and all these military people and all these kings and
Yeah,
all
well, you
these
brought up probably
dictators.
the most famous one that's been called the Antichrist, which would have been Hitler
Oh, yeah.
during that period of time. And then whenever
Yeah, you didn't want to be
Then
in that
whenever-
competition.
whenever Jerusalem was made a nation again, Israel was made a nation again, and then it just took on a whole new life of itself, because they were convinced that Hitler, and then that happened within 20 years, 30 years.
Well, you and I have talked about this before, about how plain Jesus was in Acts chapter 1 right before he ascended. And they said, are you now going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And he said, it's not you. It's not for you to know the times and the seasons. That's God's job.
That's right.
Well, all these people got their graphs on TV and, got their booklets, same for this booklet, and you can read and you know exactly when the time of his return is. I don't know why people even waste their time doing that, because the Bible specifically says nobody knows.
The other thing that's astounding to me is the amount of TV ministries that devote 90% of their time towards this theological discussion.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'm not going to mention a name, but if you like this subject and you've studied this, you'll probably know who I'm talking about. Back in the 70s, there was a guy who wrote the Great Planet Earth, Late Great Planet Earth, and everybody jumped on board. Here it is. It got it figured out. This is the graph. Everybody's got it figured out.
I found the Rosetta Stone.
Yes, I have the key out to the Rosetta Stone. And everything came and went.
Nothing happened.
Oh, yes, and something happened. He became a millionaire, and then when nothing happened, he wrote another book.
And sold it again.
And sold it again.
Yeah. Well, if we wanted to talk about verses 1 through 6, we could give you all kinds of explanations as to what they mean. But honestly, I think every one of us read it and do the best we can with it. I'm in the camp that I don't think that changes. I don't think that that there is this moment that preterist views are good all the way up to end of chapter 19. And then we hit to this futurist, and I know that's a popular thought process among many places with preterist views, because there are those, chapter 20, that can't have anything to do with chapter 19.
You think about certain things and try to put it in that passage, and
this was a one-off, and this makes it hard.
Start right at the beginning and erase everything that we know and start. And by the way, I shouldn't have been unkind to that gentleman that I mentioned a little while ago. I told you I wasn't going to tell you his name, but his initials was Hal Lindsey. and maybe if we get to the point where he'll write a third book telling everybody what was going to happen. And these are guys that are highly intelligent.
Oh, I know.
I think they all should be read. I don't think you should discard any of them. Let's go back to what you read in that first paragraph for a little while ago. The main thing that people have to figure out, and that goes to the entire book of Revelation and Revelation 20. The main thing that people have to look for in these passages that we have been reading is this literal or is this a symbol?
Mm-hmm.
So in the first 6 verses that you read, 6 times it says 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So is that 1,000 years a literal 1,000 years, like we normally count years? Or is that a symbol of something? Maybe a symbol of completeness, 10 times 10 times 10. Who knows? There's no place that says this is literal and this is a symbol. Now, you can start crossing out things when you learn that, according to what you read in verse 1 and 2 of chapter 20, there's this angel comes down out of heaven. Is that angel a symbol of something, or is that a literal angel? I would say there's not anything to say it's not, so it's a real angel. And he had the key of the bottomless pit. Okay, now here we go. We start going with symbols. The angel had a key, a literal key, and was going to unlock this abyss is what the American Standard
Mm-hmm.
says. This, he's got a bottomless pit. There's no such thing. Nobody's ever walked around on the earth going, hey, look what I found. I found a bottomless pit. It goes all the way through the planet. There's not one of those, so that has to be a symbol of something. And that's what you have to do with every entity and every idea that's posed here. You have to figure out, and that brings us to 1,000 years. Is 1,000 years something that's literal, or is that just a symbol of something? He's got a great chain in his hand. He's got a chain that's strong enough and big enough to hook, arrest Satan. Well, that's not a real chain. There's no chain that big, so it has to be.
Chain only is a physical thing, and the angels doesn't have to be.
That's correct, and Satan's not either.
So, well, that's what I meant. Satan's an angel, so.
And Satan is an angel. So he takes the dragon, and here's one place where at least John explains to us what these symbols mean. He takes the dragon, who is the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan. Boy, they covered that one.
Mm-hmm.
I wish they'd done that with a few other verses in this chapter, but they covered that one. At least you knew who those Christians were fighting in the first century. And this angel takes the chain and he binds Satan for 1,000 years. Okay, there's the first time it's in the book of Revelation, the first time it's in the Bible. Is that a symbol, or is that a literal 1,000 years? And how you interpret that is going to be based on how you interpret the entire book.
Yeah. Well, again, honestly, I think if you try to make this into something because we don't understand it, I think that's a problem. Again, I go back to what you said in the very beginning of this, when we started this entire series. It's okay that we don't know and we don't understand, because this book really wasn't written to us.
I'm amazed that we can understand any of it.
I don't think how do I say this? Up through Revelation 1:19, as I've shared with you several times, the narrative plays out there is that there is a judgment, and choose wisely.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much the narrative. But chapter 20 is sort of, okay, this is sort of like God's plan of what He's going to do, and so that you'll see it and understand what's going on. But we're not seeing it, and we don't understand what's going on. I don't see how you can take anything literally or figuratively and make it match something that you can actually put your finger on.
Especially when you're going back and forth with it.
Yeah, pits.
It's really Satan, but it's not a real chain.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, there is no... I just don't see any relevance to the time we're living in today. Now, if it does become relevant, this is what I honestly believe. I honestly believe the Holy Spirit will make it relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But until that time, I don't think it's sort of like when Paul tells, he said he knew a man who'd been caught up into and he wasn't allowed to tell anybody. Well, I think this right here was written to John, and the people that understood it, they understood it. Yeah. Anybody else, there's a form of arrogance that says, oh, I know what this is.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
At least most churches that I know of are not going to sit down with a new convert or a new member and say, as soon as you explain this to us, you can be a member here. As soon as you explain this to us, you can... there are some topics that are pretty important when it comes to
Oh, absolutely.
Revelation 20 is not one
of them.
Hold people by their throat and say, give me the meaning of this, and then you can be a part of our group.
I got enough problem with loving God with all my heart, soul, strength, and mind, and loving my neighbor as myself.
Yeah.
Why should I even attempt Revelation 20?
Well, it's in the book for a reason. We may not know what the reason.
I don't think we know the reason.
Okay. So they bound him. This angel binds Satan for 1,000 years, and he throws him into the abyss. He throws him into the bottomless pit. Okay. There's something else. It's a symbol. And he shut it and sealed it over him so that he should not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. Okay, now this is really interesting. Is this literal, or is this? Did we actually throw Satan in a bottomless pit and not feed him for 1,000 years? He didn't get any food and water, but he's in there for 1,000 years. That's probably a symbol. That's probably not literal. And he should not deceive the nations any longer until the 1,000 years were completed. After these things, he must be released for a short time. Here's the first couple of times in the New Testament where we are approached with this idea of 1,000 years. And it's really interesting. You may not agree at all with people you hear on television or people you know in your own life, in your own ministry. It's really interesting to see what people say about this 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And like you said, if we never get it figured out, that's okay too. That's not one of those salvation issues. If it is, we're all in trouble.
Well, yeah. And I'm not curious, so it doesn't.
Okay, I'm going to pique your curiosity here. So why was he released for a little bit afterwards? I don't know. It doesn't say.
No, I have no clue.
These things must be realized for a short time. Now, I want you to look for this word that we've talked about over and over in the book of Revelation. And I saw thrones that sat, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given to them. Mm-hmm. We can take this book, especially chapter 20, and make it say all kinds of things, but we can't miss the big focus. The big focus is judgment. God is going to judge somebody. He's going to judge everybody. He starts out by judging Satan and throws him in this pit.
Well, okay, then time out. Here's where sometimes the confusion can come into play, and this is why I'm going to play a little devil's advocate with you.
And watch out, you might get thrown in the bottomless pit.
Preterist, when did this judgment happen? It's already happened.
First century.
First century. Historical, it would have been happening.
In the process.
In the process.
Yeah.
Futurist, well, it hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen. See, that is... You and I, now the one thing that we can 100% agree on is, yeah, there is a judgment. For sure. Now,
well, see, the question is a question of time. Now you're talking about the overall picture.
That's right. See, I think we can take the truths out of here, but I think if we play them out historically, that's where we're messing up with this particular.
That's exactly right. And like when you get to the end of this chapter, you could have a bunch of people who say, I'm not sure what any of these symbols mean, and since I'm not sure what any of these symbols means, I don't have to look. You do have to look at the rest of it because the whole chapter is about judgment.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting judged.
Yeah. Satan.
So don't get caught up in
thrones,
symbols and thrones. And
then everybody stands before the great white throne.
When those books are open.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big this is a big judgment scene.
If you look in verse 4 in the middle, it says, and judgment was given to them. Who? These angels that came down. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded. Now, is that literal or is that a symbol? I hope that's a symbol.
Go ahead.
Judgment is the subject of this passage. And we can't miss this by arguing about all the other little minor things.
Right.
That we'll never figure out. They received this mark. We read this before about the beast. They worshiped the beast, and they had this mark on their forehead and on their hand. And they came to life. They had been beheaded. That was probably a symbol. They came to life and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. Now, I know lots of people who are part of our brotherhood, you and I, who say, well, nobody's ever going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years. That may not be true. There may be lots of people who reign on the earth for 1,000 years, according to this. And every once in a while, as I'm reading this, I'm thinking all the arrows and all the direction that people put towards Israel. If they go over and rebuild that temple, I might change my mind about some things, about this whole book.
Well, again, literal or figurative. I mean, that's going to be your, and not even counting whether you're preterist, historical, or futurist. I mean, inside each one of those, literal and figurative has meanings.
Sure it does.
So, I mean, you could come up with 100 different meanings to this.
And that's why there's never an indication in this book or anywhere else in the New Testament that when you get to the gates, God's going to start asking you a bunch of questions about Revelation and about Revelation 20.
Right.
That's not the point. The point was these people in the first century had to have something to hold on to. And we can learn those lessons too, but it's not that primary lesson. The rest of the dead did not come to life until 1,000 years were completed. This is the first resurrection. Now, if there's a first resurrection, guess what? There's probably another resurrection. There's probably a second resurrection. We're going to find out what that second resurrection is, and maybe that's a good place for us to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Blessed, okay, you read one more verse. Blessed and holy is the one who has part in this first resurrection. Over these, the second death, and I love this because we don't talk about it very much. All of us are going to die once. You don't have to die the second time.
No, because what? Finish that.
Because the second death has no power, but they will be priests of God and of Christ, and will reign with him for 1,000 years. Those people are...
Now we have our second 1,000 years.
You have your second... Well, you have 1,000 years, and something happens at the beginning, and something happens at the end.
And then they say, and they will reign
another reign
with 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So there is it's like one... now this commentary I read dealt primarily with the concept of what the language meant when this book was written in the first century. What did 1,000 mean? What did 7 mean? What did 3? All the various things. And of course, according to him, 1,000 was in their mind, a complete number. It was like the highest number. Now you could put 10 times 1,000, which meant infinity to them.
Yeah, completeness.
But completeness. 1,000 for them was it was a long time. Mm-hmm. Didn't necessarily mean exactly 1,000 years. It was just meant a long, long time in a figurative way.
I think you're exactly right, but I grew up in a church where if somebody believed what you just said,
mm-hmm.
that there were going to be people led by Christ who were going to reign on earth for 1,000 years, those people weren't right.
Yeah.
And those people weren't Christians. Well,
especially ones who have just been re-resurrected.
What's being resurrected?
Yeah, the ones who's reigning, they were resurrected for it.
Yeah.
What's up with that?
So,
Lord, you brought me back to life and you keeping me here?
Well, that's what it has to be it doesn't explain to you where it is. That's one of the problems here.
That's
It
right.
doesn't explain to you where it is. I don't give a diddly flip. Are we allowed to say diddly flip?
Evidently.
I don't give a diddly flip about where this is going to be. I want to be there. And that should be everybody's goal. My goal is not to be able to get all the questions right on the final exam about Revelation. Forget that. That ship sailed a long time ago. But the point of everything that we're going to read in the next couple of weeks there's a judgment there.
Yeah. And it is a very poignant moment declaring, because 1 through 19, we had some judgments that Jesus passed on to the 7 churches. Then we had some judgments passed on to the kingdoms, the groups of people, the ones who were had mistreated and hurt the martyrs, and they were clamoring for justice, oh God. And then we go through the various proclamations, all the various 7,
all the bowls and
the candles, everything. We go through everything, all this judgment. And the most amazing thing we have at the end of chapter 19, the rider of the white horse, and then we have what would look like is one of the first final judgments, because it still yet leaves it at the end. Okay, the second death has no power. So these are people who've already gone through the physical reality and now are into the second reality, which is the eternal reality.
Yes, and a good place to start with a study like that would be, what is the first death? What is the first resurrection? What is the second death? He explains.
And there is no, the second death has no power.
No, doesn't have any power over these people who did not worship the beast.
That's right. Oh, okay, I get what you're saying now. So there was, which gives a distinction between those who could suffer from the second death.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be our place to stop this
That's
week.
a great place to stop.
Because that's a whole nother can of worms with
I heard a minister say one time, and we can end with this. I heard a minister say one time, you have to die once. You don't have to die twice.
That's a good saying.
Yes.
Good saying. And that actually takes our Revelations chapter 20, verse 6 into play. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, we hope as we go further, and not to make this any more complicated than it can possibly be, because it's truthfully the most complicated portion of the scriptures that I think we read. But I think one of the truths that we can take from this reading is that it's okay that when we don't understand something, because the blood of Jesus Christ is still the grace that satisfies our life. So, hopefully, as we go further, we'll get into some more details. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to let us know or ask us and contact us. You have anything you add before we close out this week?
Yeah, I don't have a computer address, but you do. So if they have any questions,
Send them to me.
send them to Mark Mitchell.
And you all have the email address. And we'll see you next week. God bless and have a great week. Oh, and enjoy the new weather we're having.
I hope so.
Yeah.